Keanu had come to the small coastal town without telling many people. He wanted quiet days and peaceful nights, far away from the noise of big cities. The pressure of cameras and the endless voices asking for something from him. He rented a small room above a bakery that smelled of fresh bread every morning. From his window he could see the sea stretching out endlessly, the waves moving gently under the golden light of sunrise. He liked it here. It felt simple. It felt safe. The town was small enough that everyone noticed new faces, but big enough that people didn't interfere too much. The fishermen left early every morning. The shopkeepers opened their stores slowly, and children played barefoot in the narrow streets. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. And news traveled faster than the wind when they saw Keanu helping an old man carry heavy sacks of rice to his house. They talked about it when they saw him buying fruit for a hungry little boy. They talked about that too. Slowly, his kindness became a topic in every corner of the market. Keanu never told them much about himself. He didn't say what he had done. Before, he didn't speak about his life in detail, but he didn't need to. People could see his heart in his actions. When he saw a broken fishing net lying on the pier, he sat down and fixed it without being asked. When he saw a dog limping, he took it to a vet in the next town and paid for the medicine. His days were quiet but never wasted, and it was this quiet kindness that drew the attention of the wrong people in the back of the dockside cafe. A group of men sat most afternoons, drinking and watching. They were known in the town, but not in a good way. They lived off tricks, scams, and small thefts. They saw kindness not as something to respect, but as a weakness to exploit. From the moment they noticed Keanu's generosity, they began to whisper among themselves, wondering if he had more money than he let on. They imagined gold coins hidden under his bed, expensive watches in his bag, and the more they imagined, the greedier they became. One of the men, a tall one with sharp eyes, leaned back in his chair and said, "He's too soft for this place, too trusting. We can take everything from him, and he won't even fight back." The others laughed, their teeth flashing under the dim light. The plan wasn't clear yet, but the seed had been planted, and they were already thinking of ways to make it happen. Keanu had no idea he was being watched. He spent his days walking along the shore, greeting fishermen, and sometimes buying bread and sharing it with whoever sat nearby. To him, the sea was a place of peace. He would sit on the rocks in the evening and watch the sun sink into the water, unaware that from the shadows of the dock, eyes followed his every move, measuring him, planning around him. That week, something small but unusual happened. One of the men from the cafe approached him with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He praised Keanu for all the help he gave to the town, saying it wasn't often strangers came and gave without asking for anything in return. Keanu smiled politely, not knowing that these words were just bait. The man said, "We've been talking. We want to show you something special, a gift to thank you." Keanu raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. "Tomorrow morning, come to the pier. We'll take you to see the dolphins out in the open water. It's beautiful this time of year." The invitation seemed harmless. In fact, it sounded pleasant. Keanu thought about it on his walk home. He had never been out into the deeper sea before, and seeing dolphins sounded peaceful. He didn't know that behind their smiles there was a darker plan, that in their minds this gift was just a mask for something far more dangerous. That night, while Keanu prepared a simple meal in his small kitchen, the men met again in the back of the cafe. Their voices low but sharp, they discussed the details. How they would get him on the boat, what they would do once they were far from shore. One man pulled out a small glass bottle filled with clear liquid and tapped it with his finger. "One sip of this and he won't know where he is." Another man grinned. "The sea will take care of the rest." They laughed quietly, thinking it was already as good as done. Keanu, alone in his room, leaned against the window frame. listening to the sound of waves hitting the shore. He had no way of knowing that his peaceful days in this town were about to end. No way of sensing that the calm he felt was just the silence before the storm. Tomorrow, he thought, would be another quiet day. But far away at the docks, tomorrow was being shaped into something else entirely. Something that would test the very core of his spirit the next morning. The sky was soft with early light, and the air smelled salty and fresh. Keanu woke up feeling calm and ready for the day. He did not know that today would change everything. The men who had been watching him met quietly at the docks. They were dressed in old clothes, but their eyes were sharp and full of secret plans. They had prepared a small fishing boat, one that looked harmless but carried danger beneath its quiet surface. When Keanu arrived at the pier, the men greeted him with smiles that seemed warm but were filled with something else, something hidden. One of the men said, "We want to thank you for all you have done for this town. Come with us, and we will show you something beautiful. The dolphins that swim far from the shore." Keanu felt surprised but pleased. The offer sounded kind, and the idea of seeing dolphins made his heart light. He liked the sea, and this seemed like a gentle adventure, as they pushed the boat from the dock. The water was calm and blue, the sun rising slowly behind the hills. Keanu sat quietly, watching the waves and feeling the cool breeze on his face. The men talked between themselves, but their voices were low and cautious. Keanu listened but did not suspect the darkness that hung beneath their words. They sailed farther from the shore, where the water grew deeper and the sounds of the town faded away. Keanu looked out at the endless ocean and smiled. The sea felt open and free, like a new world waiting to be explored. He had no fear, only a soft hope that this trip would bring peace and a moment of joy. Suddenly, one of the men handed Keanu a glass with a drink inside. It looked clear and cold. Keanu hesitated, but trusted them. "It's just water," the man said. Keanu took the glass and drank slowly. At first, everything seemed normal. The sun shone, the waves moved gently, and the air was fresh. But then, little by little, Keanu felt strange. His head grew heavy. His vision blurred like fog rolling in. The boat rocked under him, but the motion felt too slow, almost like a dream. He blinked hard but could not clear the fog. The men around him began to laugh quietly, their smiles fading into cruel grins. Keanu tried to speak, but his words were soft and slow. His arms felt weak, his body heavy like it was sinking in water, even though he was still on the boat. Panic began to rise inside him. He realized something was wrong, but the drug made it hard to think clearly. The men moved quickly. One grabbed him gently but firmly, guiding him toward the edge of the boat. Keanu struggled with all his strength, but the fog in his mind kept growing. He could hear their voices, but they sounded far away, like whispers through a wall. Then, the cold air hit his face as they pushed him into the dark water. The shock of the cold made him gasp, but the drug slowed his reactions. He flailed, trying to hold on, but his body was heavy, and the waves pulled him down from the boat. The men shouted words that sounded like threats and curses. They did not want Keanu to survive. For them, he was just a mark, a target to be used and thrown away. The smiles they had shown earlier were gone, replaced by anger and greed. Keanu fought with every bit of energy left inside him. The sea was dark and cold, but his mind burned with a will to live. Even through the fog, he remembered the kindness he had shown others and knew he could not give up now. Far away from the shore, the wind began to pick up. The sky darkened with clouds, and the waves grew taller, crashing against the boat. The men on the boat looked worried but tried to hide it. Their plan was simple and cruel. Get rid of Keanu, take what they could, and leave the town without a trace. But the sea had its own plans. The storm came faster than anyone expected. the small fishing boat was tossed like a leaf in a storm, rocking and rolling on the angry waves. The men clung to the sides, shouting to each other, trying to keep control, but the ocean was stronger than them, as Keanu struggled in the water. Fighting to keep his head above the waves, the men's own danger grew closer. Their boat was no longer a place of safety. It was a trap set by the sea itself. In that moment, Keanu's thoughts were not on fear or hate. Instead, he focused on hope that someone would find him, hope that the kindness he had shown would return in some way. The men had planned everything carefully, but nothing went as they expected once the boat was far from shore. As the sea grew restless, Keanu's mind slowly drifted in and out of awareness. The drug they had given him took hold quickly. His body felt heavy and numb, as if he were sinking deeper into the ocean, though his spirit fought fiercely against the darkness pulling him down. The men watched with cold eyes, thinking their plan was working perfectly. They laughed quietly to themselves, certain that Keanu would not remember a thing when he woke up, if he even woke up at all. One of them whispered, "This will be over soon. The sea will finish the job." Their voices were sharp, cruel, and filled with greed. But Keanu's heart did not give up. Even as his limbs weakened and the waves crashed around him, a small spark of hope remained. He remembered the kindness he had shown the people in the town, the smiles, the gentle words, the help he had given without asking for anything in return. Those memories became his strength, his reason to keep fighting. The waves were cold and fierce. Water splashed against his face, stinging his eyes. The sky above darkened as thick clouds rolled in, hiding the sun. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the sea swelled, growing more dangerous by the minute. Keanu's breath came in short gasps. Each breath was harder than the last, but he refused to let the ocean take him without a fight. Meanwhile, on the boat, the men struggled against the rising storm. The small vessel rocked violently, its wooden sides creaking under the pressure of the waves. The wind howled, tearing at their clothes and shouting warnings no one wanted to hear. The men shouted at one another, trying to keep control, but fear had begun to replace their earlier confidence. One man clutched the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The boat's engine sputtered and groaned, barely able to push through the angry water. They realized too late that they had underestimated the sea's power. Their plan to get rid of Keanu and escape unnoticed was falling apart in front of them. The storm was no longer a background threat. 'Twas now their enemy. The sea that was supposed to hide their crime was turning against them. Waves crashed over the bow, washing salt water into the boat and soaking the men. They yelled and cursed, but the ocean paid no attention. Back in the water, Keanu fought to stay afloat. His body was weak, but his will was strong. He pushed his face above the waves, coughing and gasping for air. The cold bit into his skin, but he did not stop. His mind blurred, but he kept swimming, moving his arms and legs as best he could. Suddenly, through the gray sky and pounding rain, a faint sound reached Keanu's ears. It was distant, but growing closer, low rumble mixed with a sharp whistle. His heart leaped. Could it be help? Someone coming for him? The Coast Guard had been patrolling nearby. They had noticed the small boat struggling in the storm and had decided to investigate. As they approached, they spotted something moving in the water barely visible against the dark waves. It was Keanu. Without hesitation, the rescuers threw ropes and pulled him aboard. He was soaked, cold, and barely conscious, but alive. They wrapped him in warm blankets and gave him water to drink. His lips were blue and his hands trembled. But a faint smile crossed his face when he realized he was safe for now. The Coast Guard didn't stop there. They turned their attention back to the small fishing boat, now being tossed like a toy in the storm. Through the rain and wind, they saw figures clinging to the side, struggling against the powerful sea. The men who had betrayed Keanu were now the ones in danger. One by one, the rescuers pulled the men from the water. They were wet, cold, and terrified. Some shouted curses, others begged for mercy. But the Coast Guard did not hesitate. They saved every one of them. As Keanu lay wrapped in blankets, he watched the men being brought aboard. There was no anger in his eyes, no hatred. Instead, he felt something deeper, quiet strength that came from surviving, from kindness, and from hope. Even though they had tried to end his life, Keanu refused to hate them. His story was not about revenge. It was about the power of kindness and the courage to keep going. No matter how dark the sea might be, the storm continued to rage around them. But on the rescue boat, there was a calm that could not be shaken. Calm that came from saving a life and doing what was right. Keanu woke slowly on the rescue boat, wrapped in thick blankets that smelled of salt and warmth. His body was stiff and cold, but his heart was full of relief. The storm was still roaring around them, but here, inside the small cabin, it was quiet and safe. He blinked against the soft light and saw the faces of the Coast Guard crew. People who had saved him from the sea when he had almost lost everything. They gave him water and warm food, helping him breathe and move gently. His hands trembled as he held the cup, but he took small sips, feeling strength returning. Around him, the crew worked quickly, pulling the others from the rough water and bringing them on board one by one. The men who had tried to harm Keanu looked tired and scared. Their clothes were soaked and torn, and their faces showed fear, not just from the storm, but from knowing their plan had failed. Keanu watched silently. He felt no anger toward them, even though they had thrown him into the sea like he was nothing. Instead, he felt a quiet sadness. How had kindness been mistaken for weakness? How had greed and cruelty almost taken his life? These thoughts crossed his mind as he lay wrapped in blankets, watching the storm outside the window. The Coast Guard captain approached Keanu and asked gently how he felt. Keanu managed a soft smile and told him he was grateful to be alive. The captain nodded and said they would take him back to the town soon, where he could rest and recover fully. Keanu's mind drifted to the small house he had rented and the people he had met. He wondered how many of them knew what had almost happened as the boat cut through the waves. Keanu's thoughts went back to the men who had planned to betray him. They sat together on the deck, shaking and silent. The storm had thrown their boat overboard, and now they were caught in the same sea they had used as a weapon. The ocean showed no mercy. It was as if nature itself rejected their cruel plan. One of the men tried to speak to Keanu, begging for forgiveness, but Keanu only shook his head gently. "It's not about hate," he said softly. "It's about choosing kindness, even when others do not." The man's eyes widened in surprise. No one expected such calm words from the man they had tried to kill. Back in the town, news spread quickly. People heard how Keanu had survived a terrible betrayal, how the storm had saved him, and how the men had been rescued but faced justice. Many spoke of Keanu's courage and his refusal to hate. His kindness had become stronger, not weaker. After everything he had been through in the days that followed, Keanu slowly regained his strength. He returned to the streets, helping where he could. He repaired fishing nets again, bought food for hungry children, and spoke softly to the old and lonely. The town watched him, not just as a stranger, but as someone who had faced darkness and come back shining. Some people warned him to be careful, to trust less, but Keanu smiled. "Kindness is not weakness," he said. "It is what makes us human." His words touched many hearts. The small town that had once seen him as just another visitor now saw him as a symbol of hope. Though the storm had nearly taken his life, it also revealed the strength inside him, a strength that came not from anger or revenge, but from forgiveness and love. The sea, which had been so dangerous, became a place of healing. A place that taught everyone a lesson about courage and mercy. Keanu knew the road ahead would not be easy. The men who betrayed him would face the law, but he hoped they would also find a chance to change. For Keanu, survival was only the first step. Living with kindness, even after pain, was the true victory. As the sun returned to the sky and the waves calmed, Keanu stood at the shore, feeling the breeze on his face. He looked out at the endless ocean and whispered a quiet thank you, not just to the rescuers, but to life itself. The journey was far from over, but Keanu was ready to face it, with a heart stronger than ever before. The men who had planned to harm Keanu were now the ones trapped by the sea's fury. As the storm grew stronger, their small fishing boats struggled against the giant waves. The wind screamed around them, bending the mast and shaking the vessel, like a leaf in the wind. Their faces, once full of confidence and greed, now showed fear and panic. They had thought the sea would hide their crime, but it was turning into their worst enemy. Water poured over the sides, soaking them to the bone. The engines sputtered and died, leaving them powerless against the storm's rage. One by one, they tried to hold on to whatever they could, broken plank, a piece of rope, but the ocean was relentless. The boat tilted sharply, and the men scrambled to keep their balance. Thunder rolled overhead, and lightning flashed across the dark sky, lighting up the desperate faces around them. Their shouts were lost in the roaring wind. They realized that their plan to escape easily had failed. Now they were fighting for their own lives. Meanwhile, Keanu, saved and resting safely on the rescue boat, thought about the men. He knew that their fate was in the hands of the sea now. Even though they had betrayed him, he did not wish harm on them. In his heart, he hoped they would survive this storm and learn from their mistakes. Back on the storm-tossed fishing boat, the men held tightly to each other, afraid and cold. The waves crashed higher, and the boat began to break apart. Pieces of wood splintered and floated away. Panic turned to terror as the sea claimed more of their fragile shelter. Suddenly, through the rain and wind, a searchlight beam cut across the darkness. The Coast Guard had found them. Rescue boats pushed through the wild waves toward the stranded men. The men shouted for help, their voices raw and weak. Ropes were thrown, and the rescuers pulled the men from the water one by one. Some were too weak to hold on, slipping beneath the waves, but the rescuers were quick and strong. Slowly, all the men were brought aboard the rescue boat, dripping and shaking but alive. As the storm raged around them, the rescue boat moved steadily toward safety. Keanu watched from his warm blanket, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and hope. The men who had tried to end his life were alive, and it was now up to others to decide what justice meant. The sea had taken its toll on everyone that night, but it also showed something important. Even in the darkest moments, life could be saved. Keanu's kindness had not been wasted. It had returned in the form of mercy, in the choice to save all lives, no matter the past. As the dawn began to break, the storm slowly calmed. The waves softened, and the sky turned soft blue and pink. The rescue boat reached the shore, where lights and voices waited. The town was ready to hear the story of what had happened. Keanu stepped onto solid ground, feeling the earth beneath his feet. He looked back at the sea, now calm and peaceful again. The ocean had almost taken him, but it had also saved him, and the men who betrayed him. In the days that followed, the town talked about the storm and the rescue. Some were angry at the men who had plotted against Keanu. Others admired Keanu's courage and his decision to show kindness, even when it was hardest to do. Keanu knew his life had changed forever. He had faced death and returned stronger, not because of strength alone, but because of the power of hope and kindness. The sea had tested him, But it had also taught him lessons about forgiveness and the true meaning of courage. Though the men's fate was in the hands of the law now, Keanu hoped they would remember this night, the night the sea refused to be used for evil and instead became a force of mercy. For Keanu, surviving the storm was only the beginning. Living with kindness and hope was the real journey ahead. The rescue boat cut through the rough waves as the Coast Guard worked quickly to bring everyone to safety. Keanu sat wrapped in warm blankets, his body still weak from the cold sea, but his spirit growing stronger with every breath. The storm raged behind them, but on this boat, there was a quiet, calm feeling that life had won against the odds. The men who had betrayed Keanu were brought aboard one by one. Their clothes hung heavy with seawater, and their faces showed fear and regret. They looked at Keanu, some with shame, others with anger, but none dared to speak. They had thought they could escape their actions, but now there was no hiding. Despite all they had done, Keanu's heart did not fill with hatred. Instead, he watched quietly, feeling a strange sense of peace. The Coast Guard captain asked if they should arrest the men immediately. Keanu looked up and said softly, "Save them first. Talk later." His voice was calm, but full of strength. He knew that in this moment, saving lives was more important than punishment. The men were taken to the warm shelter of the Coast Guard station. Medical teams cleaned their wounds and gave them food and blankets. Many of them were trembling, not just from the cold, but from fear of what would come next. The storm outside had been fierce, but the storm inside their hearts was even fiercer. Keanu rested in a small room nearby. Nurses checked on him, offering kindness and care. He thought about the men, about how their greed had almost destroyed him, but he also thought about forgiveness. He believed that kindness was stronger than revenge, and that showing mercy could change even the hardest hearts. Outside, the storm was fading. The dark clouds moved away, revealing a sky filled with stars. The sea grew calm, its waves gentle once again. It was as if nature itself was healing after the battle it had fought. News of the rescue spread through the town quickly. People gathered at the shore, waiting to hear what had happened. They whispered stories of the storm, the betrayal, and the courage that had saved Keanu's life. Many admired his choice to save those who tried to harm him. It was a lesson in strength and mercy that touched everyone in the days that followed. Keanu returned slowly to the town. He walked the familiar streets, greeted old friends, and helped wherever he could. His kindness did not fade, even after facing such danger. Instead, it grew deeper, a quiet fire that warmed those around him. The men faced the law. They were held responsible for their actions, but Keanu hoped they would also find a way to change. Punishment alone was not enough. True justice meant learning from mistakes and becoming better. Keanu understood that life was fragile and precious. The sea had almost taken him, but it had also shown him the power of hope, even in the darkest moments. There was light waiting to be found as he stood once more by the shore. Feeling the soft breeze and listening to the gentle waves, Keanu knew his journey was far from over. The sea had tested him, but it had also made him stronger. With kindness in his heart and hope in his soul, he was ready to face whatever came next. Keanu had returned to the town after the rescue, but the experience left a deep mark on him. Though his body was healing, his mind was busy with many thoughts. He often sat by the sea, watching the waves and thinking about what had happened. The ocean that once felt peaceful now reminded him of danger and trust broken. But even so, he did not lose his gentle spirit. The town had changed, too. People who once saw Keanu as just a stranger now looked at him with respect and admiration. They spoke of his bravery and his kindness, especially because he had chosen to help even those who had hurt him. It was a lesson they could all learn, that kindness is a strength, not a weakness. The men who had betrayed Keanu were still in the hands of the law. They faced questions and consequences for their actions. Many townsfolk talked about what justice should look like. Some wanted punishment, others hoped for a chance for the men to change. Keanu himself hoped for both, that the men would be held responsible, but also learn to become better people. One day, a quiet moment came when one of the men asked Keanu for forgiveness. It was not easy to hear, but Keanu listened. He told them that forgiveness was not about forgetting, but about choosing peace for oneself. He explained that carrying anger only harms the one who holds it. This surprised many in the town. How could someone so wronged show such calm and care? Keanu's actions inspired others to look at their own lives. Many started to help each other more, to be kinder and more understanding. The town slowly healed, not just from the storm, but from the hurt that had been hidden beneath everyday life. The story of what happened with Keanu became a symbol, a reminder that even in hard times, hope and kindness could shine through. Keanu found new purpose in sharing his story. He spoke quietly with children, teaching them about courage and compassion. He helped the fishermen repair their boats and supported those who struggled with daily life. His kindness was no longer quiet. It became a light that guided many. Sometimes, when the sun set and painted the sky with gold and pink, Keanu would stand at the shore, feeling the breeze and hearing the waves. He knew the sea had given him a second chance. It had tested him, but it had also made him stronger. The storm was behind him, but the lessons it taught stayed with him forever. Though the future was uncertain, Keanu was ready. His heart was open, his spirit calm. He had faced darkness and chosen kindness, and that choice would guide him through whatever came next. For Keanu, living was more than just surviving. It was about loving, forgiving, and never losing hope. Keanu stood quietly by the shore, the soft wind brushing his face as the sun began to rise. The ocean stretched out endlessly before him, calm and shining under the new light. This place had almost taken his life, but now it held a different meaning. It was a place of hope, of second chances, and of new beginnings. The days after the storm had been hard for everyone. The town was still talking about what happened, how Keanu had survived a terrible betrayal, and how the men who had tried to harm him had faced the sea's own fury. But more than the storm or the danger, people remembered something else: Keanu's kindness. Even after everything, he chose mercy over anger. He chose to save lives instead of seeking revenge. Keanu's life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. He spent his mornings walking along the beach, helping fishermen repair their boats or carrying small gifts to families who needed them. Children ran to greet him, knowing the man who had faced the sea's dangers and still smiled with kindness. People came to him not just as a stranger, but as a symbol of hope and courage. The men who betrayed him were taken by the law, but Keanu wished more than punishment for them. He hoped they would learn from what had happened, that they would find a better path. Forgiveness was not easy, but Keanu believed it was the only way to heal fully, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. One afternoon, as the town gathered for a small festival, Keanu spoke softly to a group of young people. He told them stories, not just about the storm or the betrayal, but about the power of kindness and hope. He explained how even in the darkest moments, a simple choice to be good could change lives. His words touched many hearts, and a new spirit of caring began to grow in the town. Keanu often thought about the sea. It was both beautiful and dangerous, much like life itself. The ocean had tested him, tried to break him, but it had also shown him his own strength. He learned that courage was not just about fighting, but about forgiving and continuing to choose kindness every day. As the years passed, the story of Keanu and the storm became a part of the town's history. People told it to their children as a lesson in bravery and mercy. The sea that had once been feared was now seen as a teacher, a reminder that even in the wildest storms, hope could survive. Keanu's journey was far from over, but he was ready. With a heart full of peace and a spirit that never gave up, he looked forward to the future. Whatever challenges came his way, he knew one thing for sure: kindness would always guide him home.